Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. I'm Stan Cowan with Effectiv. I just want to briefly introduce what we're talking about today. As you can see, we're going to talk about the how-to guide to preventing fraud in real time with artificial intelligence. As you can see, we have a great group of experts here on the panel, starting from left to right. Ravi Sandepudi, CEO, co-founder at Effectiv. Moderating today will be Ron Shevlin. He's the Chief Research Officer with Cornerstone Advisors. Other panelists are here. As you can see, Raj Bandaru, he is the CIO of Kinecta Federal Credit Union, and Jon Bobb, Head of Fraud Risk at Unchained. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. I want to remind you that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to click that Q&A button and submit those. We will be able to see those in real time. We will probably be answering those in real time or at the end if we have time to cover more, but please feel free to do that at all times. And with that, Ron, I'm going to send it over to you to go over the agenda and get us kicked off. Ron?
Awesome. Thanks, Stan. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I can't imagine I have to convince anybody here that we've got a problem in the industry and in business in general with fraud. And I appreciate you taking some time out today. What we're really kind of focused on doing today is not trying to preach the need to do something, but get down into the weeds and really talk about some of the things that you need and can be doing to use tools and technologies to help prevent or at least reduce fraud and track it in your organizations. We've got a great panel today. I'm going to actually ask everybody to kind of take 30 seconds to do an introduction of themselves. I'm Ron Shevlin. I'm the Chief Research Officer at Cornerstone Advisors and the author of the FinTech Snark Tank blog on Forbes. And we ask, I'll just kind of ask Ravi, I'll ask you to start, then Raj, and then Jon, just do 30 seconds so everybody kind of knows your background. If your name, title, the organization you work for, and you might as well just tell everybody your user IDs and passwords, because they're going to find that out anyway. So it'd be good to just get that out right now. Ravi?
No SSN, Ron, but I'll let the audience guess that. But I'm Ravi, co-founder and CEO at Effectiv. We are a fraud management software company, work with financial institutions and fintechs. Prior to Effectiv, was part of another startup called Simility, which is also a fraud detection software company. We got acquired by PayPal and had the opportunity to work there for a while at very large scale. Prior to all of that, was at Google, again, fighting fraud on Google Pay for about a decade. That's about me. Over to you, Raj.
Raj?
All right. So I'm Raj Bandaru. I am the CIO at Kinecta Federal Credit Union. We're based out of Southern California and New York. So I've been with Kinecta for about 2.5 years, managing all of their IT and strategy, and also cybersecurity recently. So I do work with our fraud teams very closely. So I'm very familiar both on the cyber side as well as on the fraud side. So, as everybody knows, both cybersecurity and fraud are kind of merging together, sort of. They're almost interchangeable, and me having my foot in both of these spaces, actually helps paint the picture.
Awesome. And Jon?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. My name is Jon Bobb. I'm the head of fraud and risk at Unchained. We are based in Austin, Texas, and we are a Bitcoin native financial services company. So we support a single cryptocurrency. We're a little bit unique in the way we offer our products. We're not a money transmitter and we're not a custodian. So we are far and away different than a Coinbase or a Kraken, and have some very unique risks that pertain to the products we offer. I've been with the company for about 2.5 years, and like Raj alluded to, I work very closely with our cybersecurity teams. There's a huge fraud and cybersecurity nexus. Hopefully we can dive into that a little more. But it's been a pleasure to help grow and mature the anti-fraud program here at Unchained. Prior to that, I spent 8 years on active duty as an Army officer. I was heavily involved in what's called counter threat finance. So It pairs well with a lot of the fraud and anti-money laundering efforts, we do and use as financial institutions. And so that's, sort of where I cut my teeth. So hoping to bring a little bit different perspective to the conversation, and yeah, looking forward to kick things off.
And I know you do bring a different perspective, John, and do feel free to share some of your counter threat arming stories. I'm looking forward to hearing some of those. So we really have three objectives today, and I don't think we're going to actually spend an equal amount of time on all three, because I think the latter two are really the more important pieces. But, with all this fraud happening today, I wanted the panelists to talk a little bit about not just what's happening from a fraud perspective, but how it's being caused, and it's particularly how artificial intelligence technologies are being used by bad actors to cause some of these fraudulent attempts, and that is clearly spiking. Then we'll get into the solution aspect of it, and how can you use artificial intelligence technologies to catch fraud, prevent fraud, track fraud, and with a real heavy emphasis on real time. And we'll get into the importance of why real time is such an important aspect of these attempts, and then talk a little bit about the tools that you'll need to increase to improve your fraud prevention, fraud detection efforts, and get an understanding. I'll ask the panelists to really talk about this from a deployment and implementation perspective, and talk about some of the issues that are involved. But Ravi, I'd like to start with you and get your take on why there is so much fraud out there, and with an eye towards explaining how artificial intelligence tools and technologies are actually helping to create a lot of this fraud.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ron. I think we have that advantage of working with a lot of financial institutions and fintechs like John and Raj, and we get to see trends across the industry, especially at our vantage point. So it's very interesting. I think that's one of the main reasons I've stuck onto this domain throughout my career. It's always a cat and mouse game, and Ron, like you mentioned, in the recent past, things are changing, right? I think with the almost democratization of AI tools, we are seeing that being used on the other side of the fence as well. And we're seeing fraudsters like generate fake identities, even things like social engineering, where we are seeing emails being crafted. There are these leadership scams, right? Like where someone uses an email address that looks very close to the corporate address and tries to emulate one of the leaders, like either the CFO or the CEO, and sends out emails to the finance department asking them to initiate wires to a new location and things of that sort. And the other thing is deepfakes, right? Like we're seeing fraudsters use models to generate really like human looking deepfake, not just images, but video and audio. And we see actually a lot of our financial institutions still using phone banking, and that is getting abused very frequently, at least from what we are hearing from the industry. In fact, sorry, please.
I was going to ask you, Ravi, because you brought up the deep fakes, and there was an
Yeah.
incident about a week ago, maybe not even more than 2 weeks ago, where some guy thought he was on a Zoom call with his boss, and basically authorized the movement of like $25 million.
Yep.
So everybody sees and hears that news, but what tools are the fraudsters and the bad actors using? How do they actually pull this together and do this?
There are open source models. There are in fact like websites where you can simulate your voice. They're using, so these are like honestly like pretty innocent tools, right? Like they've been built for like sales and marketing purposes. Like you can't customize your phone call for every potential customer. So you can record your voice and the AI generates very customized voice messages. And the same technology is being used by fraudsters to get around stuff, right? So I'm sure many of our audiences might have noticed this. You'll get a call on your phone and you say, hello, who's the man who's speaking, so on and so forth. You don't get any response and the call cuts, right? These are potential scenarios of them recording your voice. And they can use that snippet to kind of generate any kind of sentences using your same tone and pitch and so on. In fact, like iPhones now, they've added this capability for more as accessibility features for folks who are losing their voice, that you can record your voice and you can now play back audio from your iPhone, and all it needs is 6 seconds of recording. So,
No. Raj, what are you seeing on the credit union side? And at some point, I'd love for you to share the Department of State documents story that you shared with us a few days ago.
Sure. I mean, yeah, so just to further what Ravi was talking about, right? So AI has absolutely made it easier for the bad actors and the fraudsters to commit fraud, or, to create all these deep fakes of videos, voice, to bypass voice biometrics within call centers, right? You can create fake documents, fake IDs. It just made it a whole lot easier. AI has just made it so much more simpler and easier with all the, open source tools out there now. And, people are keep developing more and more of these, right? So you almost have toolkits available that you can download and customize and use them. Phishing campaigns have become so much more sophisticated. It's unreal. It's hard to detect them these days. I mean, they've gotten so much better. Right? So you can't even detect fake emails and fake phishing campaigns or phishing campaigns or phishing campaigns anymore. So from the standpoint of, where do you get fraud from, right? So if you look at the 3 entry points, account opening is one, right? And then, once you become a member, your transaction side is where you see some fraud. You see fraud on the account opening side, and then you see fraud from cyber breaches, right? Through cyber breaches. But end of the day, so let's talk about account opening. That is where your question about fake documents. It is so easy these days with AI to create fake documents, right? Especially if you're a small business user or you're trying to open up business accounts. You do need a lot of documentation. If you're an LLC or a sole prop, or if you're an S corp, guess what? They all need some sort of documentation. And AI has just made it easier to create all of those fake documents. And it's becoming harder and harder for institutions to detect them, because there's a time lag between when the small business accounts are opened and the Department of State actually registers these corporations. So fraudsters take advantage of that time lag, or the difference between when they open the account and when all of these documents show up in the governmental databases. Right? And these days, you do hear about a lot of small business fraud happening across the credit union space. And you do not have some good checks out there either, right? So we are a lot more consumer focused. So we have a lot of checks and balances when it comes to doing KYCs and fraud checks on consumers. But that's not the case with businesses. They still need to get caught up. So you do see some fraud on the business side.
Right. Jon, I think you bring a completely different perspective coming at it from a crypto perspective. How do you see AI impacting and helping to create fraud from a crypto perspective?
Great question. I think I'd start by just saying that AI itself is fascinating and has some pretty profound implications for what we do every single day. So these large language models like ChatGPT are changing the face of our industry, but also many businesses all around the world. And these open source tools are helping democratize and decentralize the ability to leverage them, as Ravi kind of pointed to. And I believe that has a huge and net positive effect over the long run. But as we know, with any big advancement, there's trade-offs and challenges that are associated with it. And we can paint some parallels with my industry, or even just remote work. There's some enormous benefits to working remote, or the advent of different types of cryptocurrencies, but they all come with trade-offs. And the point here is, one, it's not going anywhere. But two, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What we need to do is manage these trade-offs and understand the emergence of new risks and new threat typologies that exist and change almost every single day. So fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of these risks seem to present themselves in the cryptocurrency industry first. So we generally have some firsthand knowledge of these emerging trends. Just to share a couple, deep fakes and the generation of false documents, certainly on the business side, but also on the individual consumer side as well. There was an article that came out, I think, just a few weeks ago, where a journalist was able to go onto a AI-generated site called OnlyFakes and generate a fake driver's license. So it had his image and likeness. But the ID was for a state that he'd never been to, and completely bogus credentials, and that was actually used, that fake ID, to infiltrate and get approved for a account at one of the major offshore cryptocurrency exchanges. So it's happening very fast, and the nefarious actors are sort of catching wind of this. I'll give one more example here, just related to large language models. We've talked voice, we've talked images, we've talked emails. What we see are fraudsters using these large language models to communicate with our fraud and risk teams. So we'll routinely request additional documents, or perform due diligence on those entities. And in that back and forth, what will start as maybe broken English or some confusing statements will all of a sudden, on a dime, change into these very, very articulate, well-crafted emails that clearly you're not dealing with the same person, or the same tools that were used to initiate the conversation. So aside from advancing technologies, there's a training element and a human component to this as well. You need trained and expert teams to be able to detect and think outside the box, to uncover some of these new technologies.
Yeah, I used to think that I could make a living just consulting to the fishers and just craft their emails in proper English, because they were so poor. Now that they don't need me anymore. But speaking of that, OpenAI just we recently announced a text to video capability. Jon, how do you think that's going to drive fraudulent attempts?
I think it will change it in a big way. And as far as our products go, we are helping secure billions of dollars of Bitcoin, and we want to be sure that when we receive authorization to help sign transactions, that we're dealing with the person we think we are. And so it's something we wrestle with every day, working very closely with the cybersecurity team to implement new and kind of bespoke approaches that are using risk signals from lots of different domains.
No, but I meant is, can you give me an example of like a fraudulent attempt that a bad actor would perpetrate by using a text to video capability?
Yeah, sure. So if I have taken over someone's account and I want to authorize a transaction, and if I need help from either the bank or the cryptocurrency exchange, and I'm required to authorize that, I may obtain an image from LinkedIn or from Facebook of the person whose account I've taken over. And that in combination with text to speech or text to video can generate a video, upload that, and really obfuscate who's on the ultimate end of the request.
Great. So let's transition a bit here from how AI is helping to create fraud to, well, what do we do to help prevent it, and how are these tools and technologies going to help it? I think of it very much as how to fight fire with fire. So Raj, maybe you could talk a little bit from the credit union perspective of how you are or planning to use artificial intelligence tools and technologies. And I would really like you to be kind of specific. One of the things that just kind of bugs me about the world of AI these days, and I find myself falling into the trap itself, is that we allude to a whole range of tools and technologies as AI. And what's worse is, since the release of ChatGPT, now generative AI has become the umbrella term. So when you talk about the things you're doing, please be specific about the types of technologies you're using. But how are you using artificial intelligence tools and technologies to catch the fraud, track the fraud, prevent the fraud? And I would love you to speak also about the how you're doing in real time.
Sure. Yeah. So let's talk about that, right? So you kind of called it fight fire with fire, right? So AI is being used to perpetrate fraud. So the only solution is, as an institution, we have to up the game and use AI to counter all of the fraud and cyber breaches, or whatever the case might be, right? So, or what's leading to fraud. So what that means is the tools that we use today are sort of obsolete. And we need to advance to using tools that are more real-time and that are using AI. And we can talk about a few specific examples. So the trick here is, how do you ingest data, whether it be internal to the credit union, because we have all of the transaction data and the account opening data and everything about the member, and external data sources. Now, how do you correlate all of this information together in real time, right? Using some AI algorithms. By using these algorithms, you're now detecting some anomalies, or you're detecting unusual behaviors or unusual patterns. So you're kind of scoring the risk. You're scoring risk at account opening. You're scoring risk at a transaction level. And now, lastly, how do you stop this fraud based on that correlated information in real time? Put a block on that transaction before money leaves your institution, right? That's the key. So the situation we have today is, we are dealing with tools and data that's old. So you're always looking in the rearview mirror, right? So the fraud's already happened, and now you're trying to analyze the fraud trends and figure out, okay, what do I do next? Well, the money's already gone. That's no good. So we need to flip that narrative, and we need tools and technology that are more proactive and predictive, right? And that's where AI comes in. So let's use an example. We interact with our members. Let's say, we interact with our members using email. We interact using SMS text messaging. Members, they call you through your call center. We have their voice recordings. We have their transaction data. We have, external data sources that tell you, the historical behaviors of that member from previous institutions. So you have all of that information, right? Some of it is structured data. Some of it is unstructured data with voice and SMS text messaging and emails. There is no way a human can review all of this information in real time and make a decision. But now with AI, I can ingest all of these different data sources, structured and unstructured, internal data and external data, in real time, correlate all of that information, and score it for risk and fraud, and put a block in real time. That's what we need to do. And that's what the new tools need to do. And I'll give you an example. Okay, are there tools that can do that today, wherein you can take all of your interactions with the member and give me an instant summary of all of that? Between emails, SMS text messages, I could have done several dozen phone calls with that member. How do I get the gist of all of those communications in real time? Only AI can do it. A human cannot listen to all these voice messages or phone calls and read all the emails and text messages to make that correlation.
Jon, you want to comment on that too? What you're doing at Unchained?
Yeah, those are some great points. I will do my best to add to that. But I think Raj is right to point out that you need insights before the transaction. You want to get left of the event in time. So you want that multivariate, multi-source, data ingestion platform. And for folks on the call that are considering maybe new case management systems, there are trade-offs associated with those. Some are easier to implement, they're easier to maintain, but they may lack transparency or they may lack configurability. In this AI driven world, being third-party agnostic or being data source agnostic and not being bound by specific risk models or specific parameters given to you by a third party, I think is important. But to kind of return to generating insights before the transaction, we have behavioral analytics that may look at routine transaction patterns, and if something is out of norm, you see a spike in activity, you may close the account or lock the account. But we also know that there are false positives associated with that as well. So it's put frankly, it's a very challenging problem to solve. And we talked about developing the algorithms. AI can do a lot, but ultimately, you need to supervise these models, understand how they work, and design a framework around the threats you face. So here at Unchained, we've done away with the notion of quote unquote red flags. These are generally standard bulletized lists that if it's on this list, it must be risky, right? There is plenty of gray in that area, and plenty of fraud that can slip through the cracks. So the framework we use is borrowed or inherited from the cybersecurity industry, and that's the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So this is how cybersecurity professionals help build and posture their defenses to go after very specific threat actors that are affecting their specific industries. So a credit union will have very different threat vectors than a cryptocurrency exchange or even a company like ours. So having this frame of reference and this framework to fall back on, I think is important. We talked about a cat and mouse game. You need to understand what the mouse looks like. What threat vectors does your credit union, your bank branch, or cryptocurrency exchange get hit with the most, and use those to leverage AI to build a custom risk model.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the notion of the custom risk model, Jon, because I wanted to ask all of you about off-the-shelf versus custom models, and does it have to be a custom model? How far can financial institution get with some of the off-the-shelf models? Jon, you want to address that first, then I'll ask you, Raj, and Ravi as well.
Yeah, I maybe have less experience in this domain, but doing due diligence to acquire the case management platform we use, was a long, lengthy process, and there were lots of differences and different market segments that these case management providers are trying to serve. For us in our industry, which changes very fast, we wanted the most robust, the most flexible, the most customizable tool that was out there. Understanding that that comes with maybe more training, more documentation, more deep dive analysis to get these frameworks right. But ultimately, that's the approach we took, and the considerations that we weighed in making that decision.
Raj, how about you?
Sure. So, so the way I look at a tool is, it needs to be a framework where it comes with some out-of-the-box models that are prevalent in the industry. So let's take Ravi from Effectiv as an example. They deal with fraud day in, day out. They see fraud across multiple institutions. They see the emerging fraud trends in the market. So they know some of the trends that they need to address. So they can build their tool to accommodate some of those generic models that are applicable for everybody. However, once you come to the credit union or any other financial institution, we may have some specific models and use cases that are very specific to our demographic or user base. So the framework needs to allow for the generic models to function in addition to the custom models. Because the way I look at it is, generic models may start off, you can get an institution up and going on the generic models and you get some benefit from it. The custom model might just make it a little more effective because it's very specific to our member base, and it will reduce the number of false positives. But over time, even a generic model, as you keep retraining that model over time, it'll get pretty close to the custom model. So I think either approach is okay, but the platform itself needs to allow for both options to coexist.
Raj, let me follow up with you on that. From the custom model perspective, did you hire in-house skills to do this? Did you outsource it? Who's building that model? Who's customizing the model for you?
Yeah, so we do have in-house data scientists who actually work on building some of these models.
Great.
Yeah.
Imagine those are pretty pricey resources.
Absolutely.
Huh? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Ravi, what are you seeing across your client base, both from modeling perspective, but also just in terms of some of the best practices in terms of deploying some of the AI tools and technologies to manage and reduce fraud?
Yeah, for sure, Ron. And I couldn't have articulated better than Raj on this, but having this generic out-of-the-box models are very powerful, and especially the newer technologies that are now available in reinforcement learning and one-shot learning and things of that sort. What we are able to do is build very powerful foundational models that are trained across our customer base. So imagine like learning to use your fingers, right? Now, for a baby, learning to articulate their fingers is a skill set that is useful across multiple criteria, right? They can now learn to pick up a fork to eat by just looking at it a couple of times. They can learn to pick up a pen and scribble very quickly. So when you have these foundational models that are trained to identify broadly anomalous and fraudulent style behavior, and then quickly you can customize them for specific trends that affect a certain organization more, right? Because Raj's organization serves very different demography as compared to Jon's organization, right? So the behaviors, the attack vectors, like Jon mentioned, are very different, but you don't need to train models from scratch and need thousands to millions of data points to figure out and identify the threats that each of these organizations are facing, because the fundamental behavioral patterns are the same, but you have to fine tune them for each organization. So I think that we are seeing is a big like boon for the fraud fighting industry with all the new technology advances that we're seeing. And that those are the things that even the same fundamentals are used by LLMs, right? So you build a foundational model and then you customize it for specific use cases very quickly. So that's one thing that we are doing. And the second thing, like John mentioned, having like human intervention to supervise what the models are learning and trying to catch is very critical. So having the ability to quickly jump in, fine tune your strategies, and make it very specific to catching trends that you are seeing as a person is also very, very important, right? So that human in the loop is very critical for industries like fraud fighting, because you are impacting real money movement across the board, right? So mistakes you make have real life implications. So you have to react very quickly. I think AI models are still not there yet to learn as quickly as a human, right? But they can work at scale, which like humans can't do, right? Like exactly like Raj mentioned, they can consume so much amount of data, but they cannot intuitively act in sub-second response times yet for identifying brand new behavior. So you need like both experts and models kind of working in tandem. And we very strongly believe that aspect.
You know, guys, excuse me, the history of fraud prevention and detection has always been about finding a balance between optimizing the fraud protection, fraud prevention, and the customer experience, the consumer experience, the user experience, whatever it might be. And you guys have talked a lot about, you know, finding the right balance from a friction perspective. But John, I wanted to go back to you because in our prep calls, you were talking a bit about a concept around dynamic friction. And I was hoping you'd share a little more about what that is, what you meant by it, and how you achieve it.
Yeah, certainly. So the term dynamic friction, I heard it somewhere. It's not something I created, but the idea that you're able to, dynamically, respond to the situation or the event in front of you and adapt to it with, several different types of responses. So, to paint the picture, in that example I gave where, an email correspondence going back and forth between a fraudster and someone on my team, when, patterns and things change, what are the next steps? How do we, leverage the right friction at the right point of time? So as it pertains to the actual, platform, we're concerned with account takeovers all the time. Somebody gaining access to a customer's credentials and going in and either executing trades or potentially stealing Bitcoin. Again, we rely on these threat vectors and quote unquote kill chains. It's a bit of a harsh word, but there are very specific indicators and metadata that exists to expose a pattern of activity that is suspicious. So for an example, if a login occurs from an unfamiliar IP address, or there were several failed login attempts, but ultimately they got through, and once they are in the platform, if they start changing emails, updating phone numbers, changing multi-factor authentication, all of that occurring within the same 10-15 minutes of them adding a new bank account or conducting a transaction, is anomalous and is one of those patterns of activity we want to slow down. So at each step along the way, we can dynamically send an SMS verification. We can force an additional 2FA confirmation, or even force a video recording or biometrics. And all of that again is to slow down that pattern of activity, so we can be assured that the activity occurring is intended by the actual owner of that account.
So those are decisions that are getting made in real time at a transaction by transaction level basis?
Yeah, and so, depending on the particular group of events, if it is, a login, a password reset, and, that's it, that's going to be, maybe handled differently, with a maybe, less invasive, less friction causing check. But, those two elements in combination with, several other high risk events, may cause us to completely lock the account.
Jon, do you have any sense from a measurement perspective, sort of pre-using AI to current using AI, of what percentage of fraudulent transactions you've prevented, or, dollar figures? Do you have a sense for what the impact has been?
Yeah, well, I think automating intelligently has yielded tremendous results for our team. In terms of dollar amounts, we operate in Bitcoin, but it is safe to say having dealt with lots of credential stuffing attempts, lots of DDoS attacks, and fake and stolen bank credentials and accounts, it's in the millions. But to that point, it is very tough to quantify. Ultimately, management wants to see results. How are you measuring success? So as these AI models are working, in real time, you'd like to put dollars and cents to these decisioning tools and quantify the impact.
Raj, how about at the credit union? Can you estimate what impact using the AI tools has had on your fraudulent activity?
So it is making an impact, Ron, but where we are going through some transformation now, because we are still in the mix of using some older technologies. But as we have started using some internally developed AI machine learning models, absolutely has made significant improvement. Okay, I cannot quantify it on a percentage basis or dollar terms because fraud has gone up 300% in the last couple of years, right? So it's the establishing of that baseline, and then measuring against that baseline is kind of subjective at this point. Hence, that's the reason why I say, okay, I cannot exactly quantify it, but have the AI models and machine learning models made a difference? Absolutely, huge difference, right? And the more we embark on this journey, I think the better the mitigation is going to be.
Ravi, across your client base, have there been any attempts to kind of quantify the benefits of the impacts?
No, I mean, yeah, for sure. Like we see millions of dollars of impact pretty immediately once we start enabling some of the automations like Jon mentioned. It's also a little tricky in the fraud side to put dollar value, because the better your models work, the earlier you're catching the fraud. So the dollar value of the fraud is lower, right? So, but you can always try to project how much it could have caused if you wouldn't have caught the fraud earlier. And the other thing is we are seeing more and more of the continuous monitoring, like Jon mentioned, right? So the industry is moving from this point in time authentication modality where you're just saying, hey, are you the right person? Give me the right password and the OTP. And now you can do whatever once you've logged in, versus, hey, validate once, twice, thrice. And as you're making more and more riskier transactions, you're upping up like your the kind of verifications that you're doing behind the scenes and adding more friction very dynamically across the user session. And that becomes very, very powerful, right? And with like deep fakes, authentication, you can get around authentication, right? Like you show that you create a live looking person, they do Face ID, whatever it is to get through. But then you still have to keep monitoring what they are doing after they have authenticated themselves and keep checking continuously.
Got it. Jon, we got a question from somebody, one of the attendees, that I want to pass on to you first, and then see if Raj wants to weigh in as well. The question was, how are you mitigating bias and drift in your models? And are you using any external model risk management tools to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say, we are a growing company and a lot of those things are, maturing in real time. But, bias and drift is something, we're concerned with and about a lot. And, I'm going to keep harping on these very specific threat vectors. And, we associate each threat vector with false positives. So, if we are controlling for identity theft or bank or wire fraud, those are different risk decisioning models that all come with different types of false positive scenarios. So, learning and understanding from every auto denied account and every false positive account is critical. So, there are times when we get it wrong and, it leads to an angry email that, ultimately affects the business. As a part of the change management process, that scenario is worked into these supervised models and we look to improve upon them. And then of course, external validation and, consultants, who have a broad perspective on the industry, are certainly helpful in, helping, ensure those models aren't, drifting too far.
Raj?
Yeah, sure. So John kind of touched on a couple of those items. So let's think about it. How does bias get introduced into a model, right? Well, it's garbage in, garbage out. It starts with having clean data. So as long as you're providing clean, attributable data, right, and from a data integrity standpoint, you're, kind of confident that it's really attributable to the member's transactions or the member's profile or the member information and all of that. If you think it's accurate, then that's point number one to make sure that there's less bias. And then of course the models themselves will end up creating false positive rates or auto denial rates like John was talking about. So you have to, from a governance standpoint, continue to monitor your false positive rates. So if your false positive rate is too high, that means your model's probably not working as effectively, right? So you continue to tweak and tune the model to get it as accurate as possible with clean data and, eliminate some of that bias and eliminate some of that drift.
And have you been using external? What tools are you using to do that? Well, let's just put it that way.
Right now, it's all internal. I mean, again, we have some maturity in that to do in that space as well.
Ravi, did you want to address that question too?
Yeah, for sure. I think there are multiple technical tools that are available that we use within our platform as well. And there are concepts like, there's some workflows that organizations themselves can have internally, like having champion challengers, like testing before deploying new versions of the model, seeing how they're performing compared to the existing one, A/B testing, and so on, to measure some of these aspects. And generally in regulated financial institutions, there are big playbooks that you have to follow from a model governance perspective, right? Like you can't use gender or race and things of that sort while training your models, which comes into the bias aspect. But from more technically monitoring what you've trained and performed, there are a lot of technical metrics that you can use.
So we've already started talking about the tools, which was going to be the third section. So I think that's kind of getting us there. And Raj, I want to come back to you on a tools question. And I know you, in our prep calls, were very articulate and adamant about how some of today's existing tools fall short and so forth. But what I'd really like you to talk to, what are some of the integration and implementation challenges that you faced in implementing and integrating AI into the existing tool set that you've got today? How did you deal with that? Where are you going with that? Can you talk a little bit about sort of this from the implementation and deployment perspective?
Sure. So, we talked about AI. How is that perpetuating fraud. We talked about, the need for a real-time environment or a real-time platform. So having said that, how do we get to that real-time platform, right? So the tenets behind that is all your technology solutions that you have in your credit union or your financial institution, they're all open. That's the first assumption, right? So what that means is, even the fraud platform needs to be an open platform that can integrate to multiple data sources in your environment. Integrate with your core system, integrate with your data warehouse, integrate with all your loan origination systems, right? Integrate with external sources of data, bureau data. Or you may have another, several other external data sources. So now how do you pull all of this information in real time so you can correlate that using your AI algorithms to detect anomalies and behavioral anomalies to stop fraud in real time? The platform needs to integrate with all these solutions in real time. That becomes a key factor, right? So the problems we face with that kind of an architecture is, as a credit union or a financial institutions that use third-party products, now we rely on our third-party products and third parties to make themselves available for this integration. And that therein lies the challenge. So for instance, if I have Effectiv come in and ask them to integrate with 10 or 15 of my third-party providers, think about the amount of politics and back and forth and legal contracts and NDAs and the data exchange related implementations that we need to go through, or any constraints, technology constraints that you have to go through if they are not an open platform. So in an ideal situation, all the technology solutions that you use are either near real time or they have an open platform that you can integrate with and extract data in real time. That's your implementation challenge. And we are kind of, progressing on that path as well to get there. We are not there yet, but we are working towards it.
Right. Ravi, one of the attendees asked, can we suggest any vendors working in the real-time fraud AI space? I think we can do more than just suggest some vendors. We can actually talk to one, but I don't want you to give a commercial here for Effectiv. I mean, you clearly are in the real-time fraud AI space. And I think in keeping with the tools discussion, I'm wondering, so who do you integrate with and partner with to create a broader solution?
Yeah, wow. Excellent question. So yeah, we are trying to be that open platform that Raj mentioned, where we want to consolidate all the data onto our platform and help train models, help our customers write that decisioning logic on our system. We plug into, there are really good data providers like bureaus that Raj mentioned that have become these centralized areas where they're collecting information about users across financial institutions, right? And there are other data providers like LexisNexis and Socure and Sentilink and several others that we plug into that have this immense power of network effect that they have created, and their inputs add tremendous value to the models that we've trained, right? And I think that is key. You can't be acting independently to fight fraud, right? You have to be part of networks, and this is key to fighting fraud. And I think that collaboration needs to happen more and more in the industry.
Great. Guys, we have time for one more question. I've got one more attendee question as well. John, you're going to get the last word on the webinar here. And we're going to go back a little bit in our discussion because one of the attendees is asking, how do you handle customer education when we're dealing with the dynamic friction that you talked about and how you're altering the process there?
Yeah, so I'd say in one word, or two words, intelligent design. And it's very difficult to do. I think many of the folks on the call who are in risk and fraud and compliance, you have to wear many hats. One of those hats is helping the product development cycle and generating the well-designed workflows that communicate the right pieces of information. You may link to specific knowledge bases, but you provide clarity and access to as much information as people want. So a great example, if somebody wants to buy Bitcoin, there are many different options to contend with. There is an ACH option, there's a wire option, and you may even have a cash balance within your exchange or Unchained account. For a customer, the nuances of ACH versus wire versus cash balance are, largely lost. They want to buy Bitcoin, and if you put, do you want to buy this Bitcoin via ACH? That may not meet the client's expectations. If you reframe that to, I want convenience. How do you want to buy your Bitcoin? The most convenient way, or the fastest way. Which would be wire. Those little things can help change and inform consumer behavior. And on the back end of all that, those three different payment types have very different threat models, and we'll have different ways in which we apply dynamic friction, so that those same design principles apply there as well. And so we worked very closely with our fabulous design team to implement our controls in ways that are accepted by the community and don't result in a huge spike in complaints or issues.
Great. So I lied. I said I was going to give you the last word, John, but we got one more question that kind of squeaked in, and Raj, I'm going to give you a minute to answer this. Comment came in that the performance of real-time fraud prevention models analyzed by the AI underwriting team consistently outperform the legacy technologies, which I think you totally agree with. But the question is, what are the change management issues impacting adoption?
Well, I mean, as any other evolving and changing technology in your institution, right? Adoption is the key. All of this great technology that you put in place is useless unless people actually learn it, train on it, and use it. What good is all this technology if people don't know how to use it, right? So I think therein lies the change management aspect of, bringing your people along, explaining the value, making sure you go through the change management process of training and people understanding their new technology, the new tools, and making them comfortable from a usage and adoption standpoint. And that's absolutely critical. And that's true for any technology we try to put in place.
Awesome. Jon, Raj, Ravi, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts and expertise here. And thanks to everybody on the call for joining. Stan, I'm going to turn it back to you to wrap things up.
Great. Thank you, Ron, Ravi, Raj, Jon. Thank you, everyone, for today's discussion. Thank you to the audience. Great questions and participation. Hope you enjoyed it today. Thanks so much again, and have a great rest of your day and week. Happy Leap Day, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.